I must say our inspectors look rather different from Clare and Clare. I wish we had more inspectors like you as well. And nor have I heard of very many kind and nice and sweet ones. But that's nice and refreshing.
We have a very different approach to policing, I think, of general police officers in Britain. Well, you're armed. Are you armed? Do your police officers, do they carry guns here?
Yeah.
So our police officers, most of them, don't have guns, and the system of policing in the UK is based on something called policing by consent, and it is literally the people allow us to police. And the person who founded the police, Sir Robert Peel in the UK, said very famously, the people are the police and the police are the people, and there's no difference between the two. Whereas that's very different in other countries, certainly in America, and perhaps here in India, there's a very distinct line between law enforcers.
Yeah, we do have a similar slogan though in Delhi, with you, for you, always, Delhi Police. They say that, the slogan sounds good. Yeah. So, what you said about your profession and giving your good self, your entire everything, your niceties to your profession, and taking it away from home because you get less time with your people at home. That is true for most women professionals, wouldn't it be?
I think it's probably true of everybody, actually. I think if we're absolutely honest, if we're in a bad mood, we are far more likely to take it at home. And if they're trying to run a home, look after a family, and do a job, that's a pretty tough call. I'm very lucky now. I have a husband who takes over the running of the house and looks after the kids, so I can focus on my job. But if you're trying to do everything, I think it's inevitable that that you're not very nice at times, and sometimes it's our kids and our partners that bear the brunt of that.
Yeah, because we are just not, it's not that we are just looking after home and office and everything, we are also fighting perceptions all the time. And we are always trying to struggle up beyond those perceptions. For instance, a man can be angry and get away with it saying, oh, he's very good, he's so aggressive at work. But when a woman shouts and is angry, she says, she's so difficult, she's a problem.
Yes. No, men are assertive when they speak out, and women are aggressive. It's a very curious thing, and we've still got a long way to go before we have equality.
And that is true the world over. I mean, I speak to women from so many countries, and it seems to be true of almost everywhere, except Norway. Norway, Sweden, somehow
they're very progressive. But it's a little bit like the panelists just now were talking about how you can change a law, but that's not going to make a difference to how people think. And similarly, we've got lots of equality laws, but it's much harder to change an attitude that ultimately women are less important than men, which unfortunately is an attitude held by an awful lot of people.
You were lucky that you were able to give up one profession and just take to the other like fish to water. And you are doing so well in that, reading your books, the structure of your books, the way you write the copy, your writing itself. It seems like you were born to be a thriller writer rather than a cop. So was it something that you always wanted to do, always wanted to write? Did you try that as a youngster?
Yes, I really wanted to write all the way through my life. But when I was young, I didn't know anybody who was a writer. I didn't know anyone who worked in the arts. All the people I knew had proper jobs. They were teachers or doctors, or they worked in shops. They didn't do creative things. And it's something I'm really conscious of now that I have children, is to expose them to as many role models as possible. Because I had some great role models as a child, but they weren't in the media, they weren't in the creative industries. And so I work very hard now to show my kids that there's a whole range of professions. So I just didn't think about it as a job. I carried on writing for myself. And then when I was in the police, you can't be very creative as a police officer, but what you are is a storyteller. You're telling true stories, but you're nevertheless finding a story. Because when you speak to a victim of crime and you have to take a victim statement, that victim doesn't give you a beginning, middle and an end. They start at the end, they tell you they've just been attacked. And then they tell you something that happened 20 years ago when they first saw this person who attacked them. and then they go back to the attack, and then they give something in the middle. And actually what you have to do when you're interviewing them is you've got to find the story and work out what's relevant and what's not, and write it in a compelling way. You've got to write it with a beginning, middle, and an end, because that statement is going to be the most important piece of evidence at a court. So I was telling stories, telling other people's stories all the time, and finding a voice for somebody that had come to me with a problem. And that experience actually is really valuable now as I write books, albeit that I'm writing fiction.
So it's like your storytelling skill came from the practice that you had at policing.
I think it really did. That and the inspiration that comes from working in an industry where you are dealing with people at a point of crisis. And so I would imagine it's very similar for people who work in the medical profession. When you deal with someone who has just experienced a terrible thing, either as a victim or a witness or even as an offender, it's a moment of high stress, and what you're seeing is somebody's emotions stripped raw. And that's a really interesting sort of point of observation for a writer.
Yeah, that's a direct peek into life as you see it.
Exactly that, yes.
It's raw, it's there, and it touches you, it reaches out to you. When you write as a cop, you must have read other thrillers. What is it that you bring to your books that is missing in others?
So I think there are some really brilliant crime writers out there from lots of different countries. And a lot of them who research their books so well that I can't fault them on forensic accuracy or procedure. But what I think my books have is an authenticity that you can't really get unless you've been a cop. Because it's things like when you're talking about taking a detained person into a police cell, you can describe that. You know, we've seen it on TV, maybe you can go there and have a look. But unless you've worked there, you've spent hours in this horrible place with no windows, where it's dark when you go to work and it's dark when you come home from work, and it smells because there are people that haven't washed for, weeks on end. Those are the sorts of detail that I think help to bring a scene to life for a reader. And it's very hard to replicate that unless you've been there.
So have a lot of other crime writers been doing it wrong?
No, not wrong. Not wrong at all. It's simply that somebody who has walked in those shoes themselves is able to add a layer to it that is a bit of a bonus, I think.
What about the procedures, the police procedures?
It's obviously a bit easier for me. So I know how a crime is investigated. I know the forensic process, and so what it does is it cuts down on the time that I don't need to do a lot of research on that. But I still check it. And I've been out of the police now since 2011, and things change all the time, and legislation changes. So actually, I would never write a critical piece of procedure without double-checking with someone who still works in the police.
One interesting thing that I've noticed in your books is that always the police officer who actually gets interested in the crime and gets passionate about solving it is not the one who's within the system, but the one who's just outside the system, running parallelly to it. So whether it is Anna in your book, Let Me Lie, and she's seeking help, so the system is not paying any attention to her, but it is the police officer who is actually working on a civilian job at that time, and he's out of the main system. He is the one who gets interested and helps her. Or if it is, I see you, there again it is a woman officer who needs to prove herself for certain reasons, who gets excited about investigating Anna's complaint and actually gets into at the bottom. Is that a comment on the system, the institution, that they don't normally take seriously complaints that people come in with?
I think it's actually more of a comment on crime fiction, that there tends to be a focus on detectives. And in fact, it's something that I did in my first book. My first book, I Let You Go, is a fairly sort of straightforward character. It's a male detective inspector. The job comes straight to him. And I think what I realised after I wrote that was that that's what that I wrote that because that's what the public expects, and they expect it because most crime fiction books have a detective inspector investigating things. It's you know, from Morse onwards, it's been like that. Whereas the reality is that the people who, in the police, who pick up jobs are from all different departments, and the real brilliance is, you know, it could just as easily be in a uniformed officer, it could be in a civilian at the front desk, it could be anywhere. And I wanted to showcase some of these roles in the police that do an incredible job and perhaps don't get the respect from the reading public that they deserve. With Let Me Lie, the newest book, Murray, who is the detective, well, the civilian investigator, is probably my favourite character. So I really loved him because he is non-traditional. He's retired, he worked as a detective for many years, but he's in his 60s now, and he's just working as a civilian on the police station front desk. And I worked with lots of people like him when I was in the police, people who had huge amounts of knowledge. And in Britain, certainly, I wonder actually if you're slightly better at this in India than we are in Britain. We have a very bad habit of dismissing elderly people and not recognising how important they are and how they should be cherished because they've got so much experience and so much skill. And we kind of write them off a bit and focus on the young, up-and-coming people. And so I wanted to showcase an older person.
And you also got the opportunity to showcase his sensitive side, his loving side, when he looks after his wife, Sarah, who is suffering from a mental illness. And I think that's a beautiful part of the book. And you keep coming back to, again, mental health as a theme in your books.
I do. I think it's maybe one of my obsessions. I feel very strongly that we should be talking about mental health as much as we talk about physical health, if not more. We're very comfortable talking about physical health, and I could come up on stage with a broken leg and we'd have a chat about how I broke my leg, but you would not generally talk to someone about their mental health, and I wouldn't sit here saying I'm not feeling great, you know, I've got a bit of depression and I've had an anxiety attack this morning. We're very uncomfortable about doing that, and yet we've all got mental health and it's all very important. So I've touched on it. I think whenever you write a book that touches on loss, grief, love, you're by default talking about mental health because those are emotional, mental states that we get ourselves into, and they have an impact on our mental health.
Did you base these characters on like real life characters? Are these people you know, like the detectives or even Sarah for that?
The legal answer is no. They're all fictional. I base my characters on a sort of compilation of people that I know. So there will be a little...
Safer to say that.
It is always safer. There'll be a little bit of colleagues in the characters that I write. There's a little bit of me in almost every character, you know, a trait or some sort of bit of it. But mostly, no, they are quite genuinely fictional creations.
And your first book, I Let You Go, was a very powerful emotional drama in the first half, I believe it also is close to you at heart in the sense the experience that you did unfortunately lose a child who was very young, and were there bits of you in that part of your book?
Yes, very much so. I wrote quite extensively in I Let You Go about the process of moving on from a trauma. And it was a very therapeutic thing to do, actually. It was very difficult, and I cried a lot. It was an upsetting thing to do, but I felt better at the end of it.
Yeah, that is what writing does for you, really. It always cleanses you, makes you feel better, and it kind of, it's a good way to let the emotion out. If it were not psychological thrillers, what else would you have done? If you'd not been a cop, but you'd just gone to writing, and are you planning to get into any other genre, or is it always going to be psychological thrillers?
So I just finished writing a book which comes out in June, which has no police in it, no murders, no crimes.
Wow, that is quite something. Because now I'm used to you with crime and police.
I know, but you know, I mean, we've just talked about mental health and loss and relationships, and some of the things that you said that you've enjoyed about my books haven't necessarily been the policing side. So the new book, it's about a couple who disagree on the end-of-life care for their critically ill son. And so it's about what happens when you've got a couple who love each other very much, but they love their son more. What happens to them as a couple? How do they come to terms with their respective decisions, and how does their life change as a result?
I'm going to read it.